with you today or not, that's remains to be seen. But I haven't been taking any painkillers or anything like that today. They said I should wait until after this meeting of the New York Giants Preservation Society and then start taking the heavy drugs. So anyway, I've been kind of enjoying the postseason, and although there's so many home runs being hit, it's unbelievable. It used to be Dodger Stadium was a difficult park in which to hit home runs. A lot of balls well hit that would die on the warning track. That no longer seems to be the case. So
home runs.
Yeah, so many home runs. So anyway, I'm enjoying it, and people said, well, what about all these teams in the postseason? Because last week it was kind of a baseball festival. We had 8 different series all going on, and there were a couple of days where you had 8 games per day, and I've never seen anything quite like that. But I think this year, the year of the 60-game schedule, was perfectly appropriate, the perfect time to do all of that kind of stuff, because number one, and I'm not telling any of you anything, you're longtime baseball fans, but in the course of a Major League Baseball season, you play all the teams in your league. So, you know, the Giants play 14 other teams within their league, and they see all the teams, home and road, mostly the teams in their own division, but all the other teams as well. And of course, then now we have the interleague play, so they see 5, sometimes 6 American League teams every year. This year, we split Major League Baseball into 3s. We had 3, in effect, 10-team leagues, the Western divisions, the Central divisions, and the Eastern divisions bound together in one league. So the Giants played only 4 of the National League teams the whole season. And they played the 5 American League West teams in interleague play. So they played 40 games within their division and the 20 in the other division. So in terms of teams getting to the postseason who should have gotten to the postseason, I think the addition of all those extra postseason teams this year, they added 6 more than the usual number, was never more appropriate, because who could say who the good teams were or not, because they played such a limited number of teams. And the Giants had a very good year, so based on what we all expected, because we knew the Giants were in a time of rebuilding. Farhan Zaidi, the head of baseball ops for the Giants, a very shrewd judge of talent, who's surrounded himself with great scouts and other great judges of talent. He brought in a new manager, Gabe Kapler, who brought in a 13-man coaching staff, which I've never seen anything close to that in my experience in Major League Baseball. But the veteran players were the ones who seemed to buy in the most to it, especially the old guys like Brandon Crawford, Brandon Belt, Evan Longoria, the guys who've been around a long time, and the guys who were starting to look like maybe they were past it, like the game had passed them by. And they all had revitalized success this year, and they bought into some of the new methods of not hitting, but the way of going into a game and approaching your ability to hit. So, and the way they worked on it. So, and I think these guys they found that they were much better prepared to face the pitchers that they were facing than they had been in the past. So, anyway, it was fun to see the Giants have been in a. Sorry?
Go ahead. I muted the problem.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but I think the Giants, what we've seen in the 20 years of the new ballpark on the shores of San Francisco Bay, is that ballpark's been a very pitcher-friendly ballpark. Not a great place to hit, and not a great place to hit home runs because of the winds. And this year, we saw much improved hitting, and they hit a lot of home runs, and it was kind of fun to watch. But one thing that they did, they moved the bullpens out into center field. The bullpens used to be along the foul lines, as they had been at Wrigley Field for a long time, as they were at Candlestick Park before that in San Francisco. They moved them out into center field, so the fences were moved in center field several feet, 8 feet to straightaway center. 6 feet out to that big gap in right center field that used to be 421. It became 415. And straight away center was only 391 with the fence being moved in 8 feet to accommodate those bullpens. The other thing was because the way the park plays has always had to do with the wind. The big wall in right field that I used to call the Willie Mays wall because it was 24 feet high, had these archways in the brickwork, and the wind, the prevailing wind, would come in through those archways and get funneled through there, and would knock the ball down, hit to right field. So it was very difficult to hit home runs to right field. In the first 20 years of the ballpark, there were a total of about 2.5 home runs per year by right-handed hitters to right field, even though it's only 309 feet to the right field foul pole. We thought maybe it would play like, a mini version of the wall at Fenway Park, where left-handed hitters are always scraping balls off that wall or lofting them over that wall. But that was not the case in San Francisco. But this year, the city, because fans were not going to be allowed in the ballpark, and the Giants, Peter McGowan, a New Yorker who grew up watching games at the Polo Grounds, and probably a lot of you have met him and whatnot. But the late Peter McGowan, he thought that the old idea of the knothole gang would be cool in the new ballpark. So there's a big walkway outside the ballpark behind right field called the Port Walk on the waterfront. And people could walk in through those archways and view the game. So the city ordered, because they didn't want people congregating out there and maybe creating a super spreading event during ball games, they wanted the Giants to close that up. So the Giants closed the iron doors out there, and that stopped those winds from going in through those funnels, through those archways. And the whole wind pattern inside the ballpark changed, and the ball was carrying better than any of us have ever seen it. So they only played, 33 home games altogether, but it's difficult to say what would have happened if it had been a full season like that. But I don't think they're going to go back. I think they're going to figure out a way starting next year, even with fans back in the ballpark, if they can do that, to keep that closed up and to keep the ball carrying as well as it did this year. So Brandon Belt was one of the guys who, in particular, seemed to benefit by it. He was forever hitting balls to center field that were getting knocked down, and to right field getting knocked down. And this year, he was hitting a lot of home runs at home. The Giants hit most of their home runs at home for the first time in their history at what is now called Oracle Park. So anyway, it was a fun year. And I grew up a Giants fan, but of the San Francisco Giants, I saw my first game in person at Candlestick Park in 1962 when I was 10 years old. My dad and my godfather took me to a game there. And of course, before that, I was already a big fan listening to the games on the radio. The Giants hardly televised any games at all. The Dodgers the same way. In those days, the only games we got on local television were the games for the Giants in LA, or in LA, the games in San Francisco. So there were 11 games televised in the whole season. And then when the expansion came in, 9 games. So the telecasts in those days were big events, but the game was a radio sport. So we had Russ Hodges, who came with the team from New York, and a great Hall of Fame broadcaster, and Lon Simmons, a native Californian with also a great voice, teamed up with Lon. And Lon Simmons is also a winner of that Ford Frick Award in the Baseball Hall of Fame. So we had great broadcasters, and they taught me the game. They taught me the history of the Giants. And in 1962, the first year I ever got to see a game in person at Candlestick, the Giants beat the Dodgers. It was their first meeting with the Dodgers that year in what was to be an epic Giants year and a great Giants-Dodger pennant race. The Giants beat the Dodgers 19-8. And it made such a big impression on me that to this day, I remember the game totals. The Giants had 19 runs on 12 hits, and the Dodgers had 8 runs on 15 hits. The Dodgers out-hit the Giants and lost by 11 runs. Billy O'Dell was the Giants' starting pitcher, who won 19 games that year, 19 and 14. And, and when you're 10 years old and things make an impression on you, they just stick in your mind, apparently. They certainly did mine. I also remember Billy O'Dell got the win and Stan Williams was the loser. The Giants walked 10 times. The Dodgers made 3 errors, helping the Giants get their 19 runs. And Willie Mays hit a home run, which I thanked Willie in person. First time I had a chance for hitting a home run, the first time I ever saw a game. Felipe Alou and Jimmy Davenport also hit home runs. And the paid crowd on a Tuesday night in mid-April was 32,819. So I was a Giants fan, and I was a Giants fan for life. And then they had the great pennant race. And it wasn't quite 1951 where they were 13 and a half games out with 44 to play, although Russ Hodges talked about that on his broadcast every summer. Between games of a doubleheader, he would tell the story of what happened that year. And then, as that would be his prelude to playing the bottom of the 9th inning, the tape of it, of Bobby Thompson's home run and whatnot. So as a 10-year-old, I kind of thought, well, that's just part of being a Giants fan, apparently. That's part of the heritage of the Giants. They do things like that because in 62, of course, they came from seemingly impossible odds. And I think they were maybe 4.5 games out with 7 to play. And they caught the Dodgers on the final day of the season and then beat them in the best-of-3 playoff. And they beat them coming from behind in the elimination game to win the pennant, although it was a lot quieter and a lot different than at the Polo Grounds in 51, where it was a home game and Bobby Thompson hits the home run to win the pennant. They were the visiting team, and there are only 25,000 people at Dodger Stadium. And it sounded like a funeral. The people were depressed, and the Giants scored 4 runs in the 9th. They were down 4-2, and they got 4 runs to go ahead 6-4, and then they won the ball game by that final score on a fly ball to Mays. But and I thought, wow, they did it again. And Russ Hodges came out with a book the next year called My Giants, and it sort of told his story, but also the story of the Giants. So I was always fascinated. The year I saw my first game was the year the Mets were born and played at the Polo Grounds. And the Giants, in the yearbook that they used to put out every year, had a couple of pages that were dedicated to all the ballparks. They had aerial photographs of every ballpark in the National League. And I studied these ballparks and I made drawings of them. And I was particularly fascinated with the Polo Grounds, because it was, and Russ Hodges would tell the story about how odd the dimensions were. So I just thought that was one of the cool things about baseball. You could play the game, and each stadium could be entirely different from all of the others. And I was so fascinated with the Polo Grounds that I bought several photographs. I don't know if I can show you these photos, if you can see them on. I guess I can't do it. But anyway, they're really some great photos of the Polo Grounds, and I just can't get enough. And I guess that's my one real idea. If I could go back in time, I would really love to see a game at the Polo Grounds. And I used to talk to Vin Scully about the Polo Grounds all the time because Vinny was a Giants fan who grew up going to the Polo Grounds, and he would go. School would let out in the early part of the season, and the games he said the games would often start around 3:15, the weekday games, and he'd sit out in the upper deck behind right field where he can get a good look at his idol Mel Ott, whom he called Ottie, and I used to love to sort of provoke him into a conversation just to hear him say Ottie. But anyway, so the Giants had that long and storied history. And the cool part for me about the Giants is the current ownership. As you well know, and you probably know better than anybody, they have retained that connection to New York. The Giants didn't pretend like their franchise just began when they moved to San Francisco, because they knew they had something special and something that most franchises did not have with that long, great history. So they've kept that. And I'm somebody who can testify to that because I grew up and knowing about the whole history of the Giants long before they ever came to San Francisco. So, and I did follow from afar. I wanted to go to New York when I read all the stuff that was going to happen in 2011, the weekend of the New York Baseball Writers Dinner. where Willie Mays had been invited. He was going to come to New York anyway. The Giants brought Willie Mays. They brought the trophy. They brought Buster Posey and Larry Baer, the president of the team, and whatnot. They all came to New York for that dinner because they were going to receive some special awards and whatnot that night. But Willie Mays went to the school, the public school that is above where the Polo Grounds used to be, where he first lived in an apartment as a rookie, and used to play stickball with the kids and buy them ice cream after the stickball game and whatnot. Then he just head down the hill to the Polo Grounds from Coogan's Bluff each day for the games when the team was home. So he spoke to the kids at the school, and I just thought this was so fascinating. The Giants contacted both the Yankees and the Mets to tell them what the idea, because they were sort of invading their territory. And both teams were magnanimous about it. So, oh, that sounds cool. Yeah, thanks for calling us, but go ahead and enjoy. So the school where Mays spoke, and you guys know about it because that was the next stop that day after the visit to the school. They had a big assembly, and all the kids in the school were there to meet Willie Mays. Then they went to the New York Giants Preservation Society meeting. But Willie Mays that day, every kid in school was assigned by the principal a project to do a paper about Willie Mays, to find out who he was and write about who he was, so that everybody would know who Willie Mays was, the great and legendary Willie Mays, when he arrived at the school. And the Giants had some gear. They had some jerseys and some hats and whatnot that Willie had signed, that were being given to the kids who had the best, scholastic ratings and the best grades, things like that. And then they announced the last person, a young kid, and they didn't have any more jerseys.
Gave him money.
So then Willie said, bummer. And he took his own hat off his own head, and he said, no, I have a better idea. And he pulled out his wallet, and he took out $100 bill, and he signed the $100 bill and handed it to the 10-year-old kid who was kind of astonished by that. But that's Willie Mays, who has a great way with kids anyway. But when they were driving down from the school into Midtown Manhattan, or wherever it was you guys were having that meeting, Willie said, listen, Buster Posey, somebody's going to interview Buster. And they said, yeah. He says, well, I want to interview him. Because, and I asked Willie about this later on, and I thought that I was right. And he said it was right. Willie saw a lot of himself in the Buster Posey story, that he was an outstanding player. He was doing great in the minors the year they brought him up. They brought him up at almost the same time of the year, late May, that they had brought Willie Mays up. And as it happened in 51, when they brought Willie Mays up, they got better, and they ended up going to the World Series. And the Giants got better in 2010. And they already had a decent catcher, Benji Molina, whom they traded shortly after Buster's arrival, because they said, well, we can't have Buster here and not playing all the time. So Benji was traded to Texas, and of course, then he played in the World Series against the Giants that year, a crazy turnaround. But I think Willie saw some of Buster. So there were things he wanted to know himself from Buster himself. And so he kind of handled that, or at least part of it, when he had that meeting with all of you. So now I wasn't even there, but I know the New York Times wrote an article about it in advance because they thought this was a cool story. And they told the story, and they had a big picture of the old Polo Grounds in the Times. And then they wrote a story about how the whole thing went that day with Mays at the school especially. And so I followed it all from afar through the Times. But and I was definitely fascinated with it, that the Giants, in effect, returned to New York to their roots after winning their first World Series championship as the San Francisco Giants. So anyway, then we had the parade that year through the streets of San Francisco, and I don't know, it was a million people lined the streets of San Francisco, and were on the grounds near the city hall for the ceremonies to cheer for all the players who had just won the World Series. And I mentioned that day to all the people that there was one person in that parade. They were all going to receive World Series rings, of course, just before the start of the next season. But that day, there was one person in the parade who already was wearing a World Series ring of the Giants. And of course, that was Willie Mays, who helped them win the World Series in 1954. So Willie already had his World Series ring, and everybody else was going to get theirs in a few months. But so anyway, and it was fun to see because they had, Mays, McCovey, Cepeda, Juan Marichal. They all came to the parade and were in the parade, even though, they were former Giants and who other than Mays, had never been involved in a team that won a World Series for the Giants before. But they were just as thrilled as if they had played for those teams. And we would see those guys, those Hall of Famers, quite often at the ballpark anyway. And the Giants, Peter McGowan and Larry Baer made a big point of making sure that part of the Giants' history was there at the ballpark and present. And it was always so cool to see Mays in Mike Murphy's office at Candlestick, and then later on at what is now called Oracle Park. And the players going in to sometimes just to pay homage to Willie Mays, or sometimes to pick his brain, because Willie pays so close attention to the games now. And he would tell them about what his approach was, and sometimes they'd pick his brain on that kind of stuff. So, and that's part of the great tradition of the Giants. But and I don't know how long I'm supposed to keep going here, but I did want to say, when we talk about the history, the Giants are so cognizant of that history that each year during spring training, they take some of those guys over to the minor league camp and gather all the minor leaguers in one room, 100 or so of them, with Willie Mays and Orlando Cepeda and Gaylord Perry and all the great former Giants. And now Will Clark gets invited, and Dave Dravecky will attend, Jeffrey Leonard, among others, guys who played formerly with the Giants in a more recent era, but to tell them about the history and tell some of the stories, what it means to be a Giant and why it's a special thing. And one year they asked me to actually host this thing in the Giants clubhouse, because they would also have the same meeting in the Giants clubhouse with all the current big league Giant players, so that they would all hear about the stories and the history of the Giants. And I got Mays to tell the story, along with Marichal, of the great 16-inning game that Marichal pitched against Warren Spahn in 1963, that Mays won in the 16th inning with a walk-off homer and a 1-0 Giants win, and both Spahn and Marichal went the distance. One of the greatest pitchers' duels of all time, especially considering the both of them ended up in the Hall of Fame. And Mays told the story that Marichal told him as he was coming off the field after the top of the 16th, that Marichal said, "Willie, you've got to end this thing. I've had it. I'm shot. I don't think I can go another inning." And then Mays hit the home run. He didn't have to go another inning. So then he told that story, and then Gaylord Perry said, "Well, about 4 or 5 years later, 3, 4, whatever it was, I pitched 16 shutout innings. It was a road game in Cincinnati at Crosley Field, and no runs. It was 0-0. And the game ended up going 21 innings, and we finally won. But I was no longer around to get the win, even though I pitched 16 shutout innings." And he looked at Willie and he says, "So how come you didn't hit a home run for me?" And Willie said, "Well, you should have asked me. Juan asked me." He said, "Willie, you got to do something. I can't go." And so it got a pretty good laugh there. And the thing about Willie is, who knows? If Gaylord had asked him, he probably would have hit a home run. So that's because he's just one of the greatest there ever was to play the game. And I had occasion to, I have an Instagram account, which was not my idea. My kids told me they thought it would be a good idea. A few years back, they said, and I wasn't into it, but they said, "Well, it's good, Dad. It's the way people communicate now. It'll make you current." and they knew just the button, which of my buttons to push, because you don't want to be like some old guy who keeps talking about, wow, the players back in those days were a lot better and all of that, So you want to be current. You want to talk to the people who are listening now, who are tuned in now, the younger fans. So I said, okay, I'll do it. Well, anyway, during the pandemic, our engineer on Giants radio broadcasts on KNBR, with no games going on, everything being shut down in baseball, he started going through the archives at KNBR, the flagship station here in San Francisco, of all the old broadcasts. And he'd heard me tell this story from a Giants game in 1970 that I attended while I was in college. And what my story was in the second game of a doubleheader. They played the Phillies, and they had just played 13 innings in game one. 1970, it was 3 days before Willie's birthday. So Willie would have been, 39 in 3 days. So he was an old man in terms of baseball players. He had just played 13 innings, and now he played the second game of the doubleheader. Even so, who does that? Willie Mays. So Mays gets a base hit with 2 down in the first inning. So he's at first, 2 down, and McCovey comes up. And they went into the big shift the way they do now for almost every left-handed hitter. In those days, it was just for maybe McCovey and, maybe Willie Stargell, and a little bit later, maybe Reggie Jackson. They put these big shifts on. So they had just started to redo Candlestick Park, turning it into 49ers Stadium, which, not that Candlestick was a great park anyway, but it was a lot better than the monstrosity that it became after they enlarged it and put the upper deck all the way around for the 49ers. So, and that remodel had also, with the AstroTurf coming in, which, is the ugliest looking AstroTurf in history. So the Phillies have Mays at first, and they go into the shift, and McCovey bunts. And he bunts hard right along the third baseline. And the ball goes rolling past third and into left field. And Willie Mays scores from first on a bunt. And McCovey ended up at second. It was a bunt for a double. But the most impressive part to me, and that was impressive all by itself, a bunt for a double, but Mays scored from first, and he was 3 days away from being 39 years old, and he had just played a 13-inning game before that. So that was pretty incredible. And I told the story many times, and I remember a lot of people were skeptical about it, and some guys looked it up on one of those websites where you can look up all the box scores and whatnot, retrosheet.org and whatnot. And people found out that it was a true story, which, I'm grateful that they found that out. But then Darren Chan, our engineer, found that game in the archive, and he knew what it was because he'd heard me tell that story probably once a season anyway, all the time he's been our engineer and producer. So he sent that to me, and I was able to turn it into an Instagram. And Russ Hodges had the call on it. And to me, now this was Russ Hodges' last full year as a broadcaster, 1970. And there's no way that he could have been expecting that McCovey, with 2 down and a runner at first, is going to bunt. And far from being just totally shocked by it, he was right on it, did a brilliant description of it. Tony Taylor was playing left field for the Phillies in the second game of that doubleheader. He retrieved the ball, and he said, Mays may try to score. Taylor fields it. Here's Mays heading home. Here comes the throw. And Mays hits the dirt, and he slides across safely. He scores from first base on a bunt by Willie McCovey. That was a double. And he did the whole brilliant description of it as if you had been there. And I was just so impressed. I said, well, no wonder he's in the Hall of Fame. And that was almost at the end of his career. And, it was sad because the next year, 1971, Russ had retired, sort of. he was only going to do the Giants television games starting in 71. And by that time, the Giants had worked up to maybe 25 games on TV. So there was going to be like, maybe, and all of them road games. So once or twice on a road trip, or all the games in LA and an occasional weekend game here and there and whatnot, Cincinnati and wherever, Chicago. But Russ did his first telecast, and then he died of a heart attack. And it was just real tragic. He was only about 62 years old, and people, I remember seeing an interview with him on local television the night before he was going to broadcast his first telecast of that year. And, it was kind of a promotion for the telecast on the news, the 10 o'clock news on Channel 2 here in the Bay Area. And he just said, well, I thought I would do the things that I've never been able to do in the summertime, and, go to the beach and go to some national parks and do things with the family and whatnot. But years later, because I remember that very clearly, but years later, Lon Simmons told me the story. It was a very sad and kind of poignant story. The Giants had their opening day in 71, and Russ Hodges called Lon Simmons after the game and said, well, I finally realized what it was I want to be doing when the baseball season starts. And I want to be at Candlestick Park broadcasting opening day. And Lon, to his dying day, believed that Russ actually died of a broken heart. So he had such affection for Russ, which always came through on the air, how much they enjoyed each other's company. But that Russ suddenly had this feeling that he left too soon, and wished that he had stayed. So anyway, it was very sad to hear that story, but also kind of cool to realize the great affection that Lon had for Willie Mays. And since I've heard stories that the Giants actually decided they wanted to make a change, and I don't know if it was the Giants or the radio station or what. So, and I've never been able to confirm that story. So I'm happy to let it lie the way it has all these many years. But anyway, on occasion, when I came to the Giants in 1997, the Giants had a great pennant race with the Dodgers that year, which it was kind of a lucky break for a guy who's doing his first season with the Giants to have this great Giants-Dodgers pennant race. And with about 10 days to go in the season, the Giants came home and I had a 2-game series with the Dodgers, their last 2 games with the Dodgers. And they were 2 games behind the Dodgers. So when that series was going to end, I think there were going to be 9 games. There were 11 games left, so there would be 9 games left. And they really, I think, although they wouldn't say so, Dusty Baker was the manager, and he wouldn't just come out and say it, because if you don't sweep the 2 games, then what do you say? If you've already said you have to do it. But it felt like they had to do it. They had to sweep. And Barry Bonds hit this spectacular home run into the upper deck, which not many people did, at Candlestick in the very first inning with a man aboard. And Kirk Reeder was the pitcher. And Barry did a pirouette as he came out of the batter's box. So he launches this homer. He knows it's a homer. And he's so excited because he grew up with the Giants-Dodger rivalry since he was a kid. Willie Mays was his godfather. And his father had been a great Giants player, Bobby Bonds. He did this pirouette, which kind of bugged the Dodgers. And then Kirk Reeder kind of took it from there. And Roberto Hernandez, who had been acquired in a trade deadline deal by Brian Sabean that year, who was throwing 100-mile-an-hour fastballs, he came in and pitched the last couple innings, not Rod Beck, the closer who had given up a lead in just no time flat in Atlanta the day before in a crushing defeat. And Dusty Baker, not just for the 8th inning with Roberto Hernandez, but kept him in for the 9th inning. And Roberto got it done. And Rod Beck was not very happy about it. But that set up the next game, which now the Giants needed to win that next game. And they blew a lead. They had, I don't know, like a 5-1 lead, and they blew it in the late innings. And the game went extra innings. And we saw 2 or 3 balls that were crushed to left field. in the extra innings, it got knocked down. There was a fierce wind blowing in from left field, as often happened at Candlestick. And so we all kind of looked at each other and said, well, one thing we know, this game will not end on a home run to left field. That's not going to happen. But then I think it was the last of the 12th inning, or whatever it was, 10th inning, Brian Johnson, a catcher whom the Giants had acquired that year, hit a line drive home run. It's almost like he cut through the wind and maybe he went beneath most of that wind. And it was a home run to end the game. Maybe the greatest moment of Brian Johnson's career, a Stanford alum, and he was a good catcher, and the Giants have had him as a scout and whatnot for many years since his retirement, but a good judge of talent and whatnot. So they won those two games and tied the Dodgers, and then the Dodgers collapsed. And years later, a writer in L.A., and I can't remember which writer it was, before a big Giants-Dodger matchup, wrote the story about Bonds hitting that home run in '97 in the first inning of the first game of that critical two-game series, and then the pirouette, and how the Giants had ever since surpassed the Dodgers, that the Giants were always the better team and the Dodgers could never get the best of the Giants. And it was time that they got that turned around. And you know, when I thought about it, I thought, well, in a way, he's really right, because the Dodgers just out and out collapsed the rest of that year, and the Giants went on a run there for several years, where even into the new ballpark, which at that time was Pacific Bell Park, this beautiful downtown park, which has just created a renaissance of Giants baseball out here. But the Giants were a contender every year. They had, in a 5 or 6 year period, they only played 7 or 8 games where they were out of the running for the pennant or for first place in the division. But the team that they were generally, after '97, the team that they were generally battling it out with for first place was the Arizona Diamondbacks, not the Dodgers. The Dodgers fell behind both the Giants and the D-backs at that time. And the Giants, D-backs, and the D-backs went to the World Series in 2001, and they had Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling, and Bob Brenly was the manager. They won that World Series. So they became a very good team in short order. But the Giants were the team that was battling it out with them right down to the wire for several years there. So anyway, so I guess it's a long way of telling the story about how I could hardly have come to the Giants at a better time for that great pennant race, plus the final build-up to moving into the new ballpark, which baseball fans in San Francisco immediately fell in love with that ballpark. It's like the philosopher used to say, every town needs that great good place, that gathering place. Sometimes it's a neighborhood bar or whatever, he wrote. But for Giants fans, it became Pac Bell Park, now Oracle Park. It's had some other names over the years, but still the same ballpark. And they just like to go there. The attendance in a bad year, a down year, has been no lower than 2.6, 2.7 million, which they never even approached those kind of tickets sold at Candlestick in all those years where they had great ball clubs. So anyway, so I'm consider myself a lucky man, that's for sure. And just great to be a Giants fan. Russ Hodges, in his book, told the story, and I told this story in front of the 40,000 people at the ballpark on the night where they had, I guess it was the 50th anniversary, maybe 2004, of the Giants' 54 World Series team. And they brought back, Monty Irvin, they brought back a lot of these players from that 54 team. And they still, as it turns out, they have from the Polo Grounds in storage, the letters that used to be out above the clubhouse. You could see it from the river or from Yankee Stadium, that said NY Giants. And I think they had similar letters that were up behind home plate on the rooftop, facing up toward Coogan's Bluff. NY Giants. So they had brought those out of storage. I didn't even know they had them. And they had people holding them, and they had from third base across the infield to first base, those letters, NY Giant. Those letters were, I don't know, 10 feet, 12 feet high. And so it was kind of cool to see them out there. And it was done to pay tribute to these players who were still alive. Joe Garagiola was one of them, and from the '54 Giants. So anyway, so the Giants. I think largely because of Peter McGowan, always had that reference to the old New York Giants, and when they bought the ball club and put the group together to buy the ball club, Peter McGowan, Larry Baer. Larry Baer grew up a Giants fan in San Francisco. Peter McGowan grew up a Giants fan in New York at the Polo Grounds. But his family moved to San Francisco at about the same time the Giants moved to San Francisco. So it just kept on for him. But one of the first things they did was make sure that they made a deal with Willie Mays and Willie McCovey and the great Hall of Fame players so that they would be around the ballpark. And they made sure McCovey went through so many physical problems, back surgeries and knee surgeries. You know, it was a huge event to get him to a game. And I always thought, well, I don't know how McCovey even says to himself, I want to go to that game tonight, because it was such a difficult thing for him to go. And the Giants made it happen. You know, they had a special van, and the people came and picked him up and, you know, wheeled him into this van. And, you know, it wasn't just a wheelchair, because his legs had to stay a certain way. And it was just a big apparatus. And then he had his own booth at the ballpark where he watched every game and he studied every game. And you could go in there before a game and talk to him about what was going on with the team. And he'd give you an overview, like a scouting report on what guys were doing right and what they were doing wrong, and which guy looked like he was going to be a player, and so on and so forth. So anyway, that was all because of Peter McGowan, the late Peter McGowan, and Larry Baer. They made sure that happened, and made sure that the history of the Giants would always be a part of you know what was going on with the ball club.
Don, we can't thank you enough. I'm sure if you wouldn't mind, people want to make comments to you and ask you questions. Would that be okay?
Sure, absolutely. I have a little extra time right now.
That'd be great.
It's not time for me to take the heavy drugs just yet.
I'll ask you one quick question first. Do you feel that the history of the team has lost a little with the passing of McGowan, or you feel that the organization is still going to honor the past?
No, I think you know, Larry Baer is still there, and I think and you never know what the future will hold, but the Giants have a big part of the ballpark. When you walk around that ballpark, and I had a chance to do that before games this year because we were the only ones there. You know, when the Giants played at home, there were no fans there or in any ballparks, and we all were being distanced as the broadcast. We had our own separate entrance. We could not go on the field to talk to the manager or the players. We couldn't go in the clubhouse. We couldn't go into the lower deck even. That was too close. That was part of the distancing and the way they were keeping everybody safe. We had to go in through our own private entrance, have our temperatures taken. Every Wednesday we went in at the ballpark when we arrived and got tested for the COVID-19 virus. I'm 14 for 14, by the way, on my COVID tests. It's the only test I've ever taken where if you get the negative answer, that's good. That's what you're shooting for. But so I'm 14 for 14 on that. But and then when you got up, we were only allowed to go right up to our broadcast level, which is above where the writers were. The writers were down in their level, socially distanced. We each took a separate booth. So Dave Fleming, my radio partner, was in the radio booth. I was in the visiting TV booth. Dwayne Kuiper was in the home TV booth. And Mike Krukow was in the booth next to him where Willie McCovey used to watch the games. So it was weird. Every night for 60 games, that's where we were. And never in the same booth with each other at any time. So, and I appreciate all the effort the Giants went to and Major League Baseball went to keep us all safe. But so we'll see. But I had a chance to walk around the ballpark, and there are photos of the Polo Grounds. There's photos of Bobby Thompson and Willie Mays making the catch in '54, and different things from Giants history as you walk around the concourses at that ballpark, even in the upper deck, which I don't get to do that when the fans are there. So I really enjoyed seeing all those things. It took some photos of those reminiscences. They have an area on the club level where they have these big display cases, and they have some of the World Series pins and photographs and memorabilia from their days at the Polo Grounds up there as well. So I think that history will remain. But I think Dave Fleming came in maybe 16, 17 years ago, joining us on the broadcast, and he read the Russ Hodges book, My Giants, and he read probably Stu Thornley's books on the Giants, and there was a book that came out years ago called The Giants of the Polo Grounds. So Dave really wanted to study up that Giants past history. He grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, and was an Orioles fan, which kind of gets me because he said, yeah, I used to listen to you do the Oriole games, when I was 10 years old, so it doesn't sound like such a compliment to me now, but anyway, but he knows that history, and he's very conversant in it. And I think that Dave will make sure that whoever comes in the future, because I turned 69 on Sunday, and I'm planning maybe to retire another 20, 25 years. So,
happy birthday.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So
hey, John,
I tell this Dave a lot. I says, you'll be the lead guy another 20, 25 years, and I'm out of here, let me tell you.
Say, John, I listened to you on CSM radio when I was a lot younger.
Oh, yeah. I was a lot younger, too.
You were. We both went to the same school there, College of San Mateo.
Oh,
and I
okay.
remember clearly when the Giants Park was built, and I thought as a kid, the only way baseball was played was in the rain, wind, and fog. Now, you must have experienced those, too.
I remember at the College of San Mateo, they had a radio station and a TV station. That's why I went there. And in those days, it was a junior college. You could get your first 2 years of college for free. It was absolutely free. You had to maybe buy your books, things like that. But there were no fees, no tuition. And that was just part of the deal of growing up in California. But I went there because they had a radio station and a TV station on the air. And I did all the football games and basketball games and baseball games. And they had a coach of the baseball team in those days named John Nochi. And he had several guys that he coached who ended up in the major leagues over the years. And I would sit at a card table behind home plate, behind the backstop, and broadcast these home games. And the scouts would be sitting there with me. And I'd interview the scouts. And one of them was Dolph Camilli. And I knew that name, Dolph Camilli, just from, reading my baseball history and the baseball encyclopedia, that kind of thing. And so I always loved this story. Ernie Harwell told me that years ago when he got his first major league broadcast job, it was with the Brooklyn Dodgers. And he worked with Red Barber. And he was telling me the story about the public address announcer at Ebbets Field, who was a guy named Tex Rickard, who had a real thick kind of Brooklyn accent. He's like, ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. For Brooklyn, playing center field, number 4, so they went to Tex Rickard one day and they said, Tex, when a guy leaves the game for, and we don't know why, we'll go to the clubhouse and we'll get word as to why he left and give you a note. And we want you to make an announcement to the crowd just to inform them as a public service why that guy left the game. So that day, Dolph Camilli, I guess, had the flu. And he was throwing up before the game and whatnot. And he had a fever, but he tried to play. And after an inning, they took him out. He was just too sick. So they give that information to Tex Rickard, and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please. For Brooklyn, Dolph Camilli had to leave the game 'cause he don't feel good. Thank you." So I enjoy those kind of stories. When I hear those old tapes of games from Ebbets Field and the Polo Grounds and whatnot, I want to hear the voices in the background just as much as I want to hear the description of the game, because that's what gives you the feel for that ballpark. And so there are some tapes from around 47, 48, the World Series, and 49, where you can hear Tex Rickard plain as day. And he called Yogi Berra number 8, the catcher, Larry Berra. And, so, and I guess everybody called him Larry before they called him Yogi. But anyway.
Hey, John, one thing that wasn't mentioned, and probably just an oversight, getting back to the New York Giants, the Gotham Club, and one of the members is on here on the Zoom session today, and Nina is here. I've had the opportunity to be in there probably a dozen times, maybe more. It's a shrine to New York Giants memorabilia, photos, you name it. It's all in there, and most of it is in center field. There is something on the suite level as well, and I got permission from Ryan Greenberg, who used to run that Gotham Club. If any of these New Yorkers ever go out there and just want to get into the Gotham Club, it's just a phone call. Somebody else is running it now. I forget her name, but if anybody's ever interested in seeing the Gotham Club, let me know. I'll give you the information. It's well worth seeing.
Steve, I'll be doing that. You're allowed to go.
Just so you know.
What is that?
This is Nina Puccio from the Gotham Club. Just so you know, as New York Giants Preservation Society people, we consider you guys honorary members. So I can give the number of Emily and Becky, who run the club, to
Becky,
Gary.
that's the one. Becky, that's it.
And then all you guys have to do is let them know you're coming, and you can come visit the club. And Steve has spent some time with me there in the club. It's a great time.
It's great because I live in San Jose.
Oh.
So I can, yeah.
Hello, John.
Yes.
I had the pleasure of being you and your wife at Devil's Slide. My girlfriend, we were discussing, because I'm originally from Inwood, which is 3 miles north of the Polo Grounds, and I went to the last Giant-Dodger game, played there, where Drysdale walked and Gilliam hit a home run, and then that was in the second inning. Then in the fourth inning, Jablonski and Mace had consecutive triples, and Hank Sauer hit a two-run homer, and that lead held up. But we were talking about the New York Giants at Devil's Slide, and my pop was a vendor when the Giants were home. He worked in the Polo Grounds, and when the Giants were on the road, he worked in Yankee Stadium. So Hubble, Terry. Anyway, we were talking about the Big Four: Hubble, Schumacher, Fitzsimmons, and Roy Parmalee. About and then my when he was
That's Mike's horse.
It was. Give me 2 pieces of cheese in the package.
Carl Hubble. Hello. Carl Hubble pitched. He didn't walk the batter, and they won 1-0 against Tex Carlton and the Cardinals. The second game, Dizzy Dean beat the Giants 0-0. So these are the stories my pop passed on to me.
Yeah. Well, and, when the Giants first came out to San Francisco, Carl Hubble kind of ran the farm system, and you'd see him in the press box at Candlestick. And they had those big camel hair coats that they brought with them that probably were collector's items, from the from the 20s that they wore on cold nights at the Polo Grounds. But and they just kept them on hangers in the press box there at Candlestick. So and it was true. Carl Hubbell's left hand was turned sort of in the an unnatural looking direction, which they used to say because he threw so many screwballs. And when you'd see him, there it was. You couldn't help but look for it. And so the history of the Giants used to be on display every night up in the press box when the team first came out.
Hello.
Ed, Mo, ask your question.
Oh, I just wanted to introduce myself because the name is Mo Resner. John, we're going to give you a special gift from Gary Mintz and the association. I was at the last game at the Polo Grounds for the New York Giants. And one thing, I had my movie camera. It let me on the field. And I filmed part of the game and all the ceremonies. I even got Willie Mays' last base hit at the Polo Ground. And he wrote about it in his book. So I met Willie, and I met Eddie Logan, who was only 15 years old at the time, was a fat boy. And I had a great, great day at the Polo Ground. I have a video of it that's in the Hall of Fame. And
Right.
Gary, you've got to get John a copy.
My
as soon as
pleasure.
possible.
Thank you, Mo.
It is.
John, you'll
Cool.
love it.
John.
Great. Thank you. I
Yes,
can't wait.
Gary, if you could provide John's coordinates, I'll make sure he gets the DVD.
Absolutely. John, everybody, whoever has a question, just don't step on each other. John, you got to do one thing for us. We need a little Harry Carey and Vin Scully.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Harry Carey was he hasn't been around for a long time, but everybody remembers him. And I remember when the Giants in 1998 had one of those great stretch runs, and I think that at one point they won 9 out of their last 10 games, and they ended up, but then they lost the last game of the season in Colorado that they were leading 7-0 at Coors Field. Nafi Perez ended up hitting a home run to end the game in the bottom of the ninth against Rob Nen. And so the Giants had to go to Chicago for a tiebreaker playoff game. And sure enough, Rod Beck, who had pitched, 9-10 days in a row, he had nothing, ended up getting the save in that game and, throwing 83-mile-an-hour fastballs. It was unbelievable. And he got Joe Carter, who'd been one of the key reasons that the Giants did so well down the stretch that year, the veteran playing his final games, really. And he got Joe Carter on a pop-up. He jammed him, and then he told the story to sort of add insult to injury. He heard Dusty Baker's voice in his head telling him how guys like Joe Carter with long arms, you got to get in on their hands to jam them. And even though he was only throwing 82-mile-an-hour fastballs, that's what he did, and it worked. So, and so the Cubs beat the Giants, and the Giants did not make it. I ended up the very next day going to Atlanta to start the postseason on ESPN, and Joe Carter was hired to be my partner. And I said, I'm not that happy that you're here, let me tell you. So he wasn't supposed to be available, as far as I was concerned. But anyway, that was. But Harry, they had a big inflatable balloon from the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade of Harry Carey with the big glasses that was flying out on Waveland Avenue and behind left field at Wrigley. So Harry was kind of hovering over the proceedings in a way that night, even though he had passed away before that season started. And the thing about Harry is that he was the fan in the booth. How fans, they want their guys to be great every day. And if the big star grounds out with the bases loaded or strikes out, he's a bum, you're upset. And so Harry would be upset just like a fan, even though he wasn't just like a fan. He was a broadcaster for 100 years and knew all these guys and way beyond any fan. But for Harry, it was always kind of here's Ryan Sandberg, and Harry had that kind of gravelly voice and bases loaded, 2 down, big moment of this ball game, and here's the pitch, popped him up. Can you believe it? Rhino, $10 million a year, and he pops up with the bases loaded. Holy cow! And but Harry had the great home run call. It could be, it might be, it is a home run. And I used to say that, when I have a speaking engagement in Chicago, I'd say, I always wondered, is he like that all the time? Can you imagine waking up in Harry's bedroom where the clock radio goes off and Harry opens his eyes, he says, it could be, it might be, it is, it's time to get up. Holy cow. Now, Vin Scully is sort of the antithesis of Harry Carey's style of broadcasting. And yet I always contended that the end result was very much the same. They brought you the game. They brought you the excitement and the drama of the game. They just had kind of a different way of going about it. But Vinny, was never just, rooting for the team or attacking a player for not coming up big in the clutch. But I always used to say to Lon Simmons, I say, Lon and myself, Dwayne Kuiper, we broadcast the game. We speak English. We say, here's a curveball, low and outside, ball 2, 2-1. But Vinny is much more elegant than that. Vinny was the 1-1 pitch on the way, curve low, ball 2, 2-1 to Dusty Baker. And it's interesting to note that Dusty, who wears the number 12, if you add 2 to that and then divide by 2, you get the number 7, which has great biblical significance, perhaps in a New Testament sense more than an Old, where at least in a Jobian frame of reference, the number 40 stands out. But as Dusty himself said when I asked him before the game about it, he said, I hadn't thought of it.
John,
But,
can you do your Japanese announcer that ended up sounding like somebody we know?
I always said that Vinny, you knew Vinny was about his greatness because all young broadcasters, especially back in the days when Vinny was doing the Game of the Week on NBC in the 80s, you'd get tapes from young broadcasters who were trying to break into baseball. And a lot of them sounded like Vinny, because they were saying, well, he's the best. I should probably try to sound like him. But I hadn't realized until I went to Japan one year on a baseball trip. The Baltimore Orioles, for whom I was broadcasting in the 80s, went to Japan on a tour after the season. And I was very excited to, at long last, hear the legendary voice of the Tokyo Giants, Genshiro Asami. And, like all of you, I had heard of Asami-san, but I had never actually heard Asami-san. So I was filled with excitement and expectation when I turned on the set to at long last hear the man himself. And it kind of put me off a little bit because he was doing Vinny. And he came on, he says, Watashi wa Karako in the stadium ni orimasu. Hajime mashite doji yoroshiku low, ball 2. It's like, what? The funny thing was I did that years ago. Roy Firestone used to have the interview show on ESPN, and every so often I'd go on with him. So one day I'm on with Roy on this. I can't remember what the name of that show was, but usually he interviewed ball players and whatnot. But when I would go on, then he wanted to do comedy because Roy is really a stand-up comedian. So I did the bit about, Vinny and then how famous he was worldwide and Vinny in Japan. And I do the whole thing to Genshiro Asami, who was a real actual broadcaster for the Tokyo Giants that I had met. And so I do the bit and we have some laughs and it goes over well and whatnot. So the next day I meet up the Orioles, who were playing in Oakland. And I walk out to the batting cage for batting practice, and who's standing at the batting cage at the Oakland Coliseum but Genshiro Asami? And I mean, I thought I was flipping out, you know, that I had gone insane, you know, that I was something had happened to my mind, because I'd only seen Asami-san in Japan, you know, before. So there he was, and I walked up to him and I spoke my little Japanese to him, and I said, Asami-san, you'll never believe the coincidence. Yesterday I was on a TV show on ESPN. He says, oh, yes, I saw the program. Vin Scully, very funny. And he not only was there, but he saw me do him on that TV show with and he thought it was very funny. So I was glad for that. But
John, these Japanese stories remind me of the game that Len Sakata was catching as an emergency, and Tippy Martinez picked off 3 guys. Is that one of your all-time highlights?
Yeah, I wish I had broadcasted, because that was the 10th inning. And so my partner came on for the 10th inning, and I was just there to take it all in, but it was pretty incredible. The Orioles it was a pennant race in 1983, and they rallied in the bottom of the 9th against the Blue Jays, and it was Cal Ripken's birthday. So it's August 24th. So this was a big game, and the Blue Jays had a good team. And, you know, they were no longer the young expansion team that couldn't beat anybody. They all of a sudden they had some real players, but their bullpen was not that great. So Joe Altobelli was the manager, and he used everybody trying to keep the game going in all of his pinch hitting options. So now we go to the 10th inning, and he had a left field platoon of Gary Renicky and John Lowenstein. So Renicky played third base, and Lowenstein played second base, because he was out of players. And Len Sakata told him, and Len Sakata was a shortstop. You know, he was a middle infielder. Len Sakata told, oh, I can catch. I've caught. He says, really? You can catch? He says, oh, yeah. So he puts the equipment on, and it's too big for him, you know, because Len was built like a Greek god. He was a weightlifter, and he was in great condition, but he was about 5'6", you know, so the equipment was too big. And they saw him in the equipment, and they said, listen, when you warm up the pitcher, do not throw the ball down to second base. Just call timeout and run out to the mound, like you have to talk to him first to get the signs or something. We can't let them see you throw with that equipment being too big. Well, he thought that was just a bunch of bull, that he was fine. And he went ahead and threw the ball to second base after he warmed up the pitcher to start the inning. And it bounced 4 times going to second base. So, I mean, he looked like a kid from the little leagues that was now catching in a big league game. And it didn't matter much anyway, because Tim Stoddard, a big right-hander, was the pitcher. And the first thing was he gave up a home run to Cliff Johnson. And now the Blue Jays were back ahead, just like that. And then Stoddard gave up a base hit to the next guy. And Altobelli went to the mound and brought in Tippy Martinez, a left-hander. Now, Tippy had the worst pickoff move in the game, and it was such a bad move that he basically never made a pickoff throw. He thought it would just be comfort to the base stealers if they got to see his move and saw how weak it was. So he never paid any attention. But now he had Len Sakata catching, and he had seen that throw to second, even from the bullpen. So he thought, well, I need to try to do a little bit better job. So he broke out his balk move. And sure enough, that runner at first immediately tried to steal second base, and Tippy picked him off. And they got him in a rundown, tagged him out. Now the next guy gets a bouncing ball past the mound up the middle to John Lowenstein, the left fielder who's playing second base. And he gloves it. And, you know, Lowenstein had played some infield in the past as a utility guy. So it wasn't like him. It just, he hadn't played second base in probably 7 or 8 years. And so he couldn't make a play on the guy. Now this guy couldn't wait to go, and Tippy picked him off, which was wow, it was incredible. So now a guy named Dave Collins came up, and Tippy walked him. Dave Collins was a legitimate base stealer. This was a guy who had seasons where he stole 70 bases. So he definitely is going. And he's a legit. It wouldn't have mattered who the pitcher was. He was going. And Tippy picked him off. And Collins is screaming at the umpire. He's balking. And he was balking. It's almost like the umpire just didn't have the heart to call him for a balk with Len Cicada being the catcher, I guess. And so they got 3 guys on base, and Tippy never got a hitter out. He picked off all 3 guys. And but the Orioles were still down by a run. So now in the bottom of the 10th inning, Cal Ripken leads off on his birthday. And Cal hits a home run on his birthday to tie the game again. Very exciting. And then they get a couple of more guys on, and who comes up but Len Cicada. And Cicada is a 3-run homer to left field, game over on a Len Cicada walk-off home run. It was an incredible game. And after the game, Jim Palmer, who was still with the Orioles at that time, he says, hey, to all the writers, I've got a scouting report on Len Cicada as a catcher. Too small for the equipment, weak arm, hits with power.
John, I've got my 10-year-old son in the room with me, and he'd love to hear your home run call, but he'd also love to know if you have a history of where your home run call came from. Because quite frankly, I think it's unique, it's amazing, and I'd love to hear that.
Oh, well, thank you. That's my bobblehead. Yeah.
That is your bobblehead.
Yeah.
I brought it from my office just for you.
Now the that bobblehead, my wife, they sent some drawings of it, and they said, check this to see if you think that they're on the right idea. And I said, well, I don't know anything about it. So I showed it to my wife, who's an artist. And then she gave them some real specs on what she wanted changed on the artwork that they had created. And then when the thing came out, I remember looking at it thinking, oh, well, that's pretty good. And so Lon Simmons, the great Lon Simmons, he saw the bobblehead and he said, and Lon had the great deep voice. He says, a lot of times these bobbleheads just are caricatures, and they never really look like the person, and they never look as good as the person. So your bobblehead is probably the first one I've ever seen where the bobblehead looks better than the real thing.
It's one of my favorite things. I found it at a baseball card shop in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's one of my favorite things.
Wow. There was an earthquake up in Napa a couple of years ago.
Collector's item.
And a friend of mine was up there, and that I was in high school with, who was the headmaster of a Catholic school. And so I had called him to see if how they'd made out in the earthquake, because he lived right near the epicenter. And he said, well, we're all fine, but your bobblehead fell off the shelf and broke. And I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. And well, you got to get me fixed. Come on. I always blame my shoulder problems that I just got fixed on him for that, letting my bobblehead get injured like that. But the home run, I always feel like I don't have a home run call per se. Russ Hodges used to say, tell it bye bye baby. And when you'd hear bye bye baby as a Giants fan, you get goosebumps. And Lon Simmons would be, tell it goodbye. And the same thing, you get all excited about it. I remember hearing Vin Scully, because they were on a very powerful station in LA, and Vinny give a very vivid description, way back to left and she's gone, And I remember as a 10-year-old thinking to myself, oh, no wonder, that's it, that's all he's got. No wonder he works on a jerkwater town like LA. He'll never get out of there with that act. And which is the only thing I was right about, from the time I was 10 years old to later on when I realized how great he was. He was still in LA. He never left LA. But although apparently the Yankees at one point in the 60s offered him a job to come do the Yankee games. And he was kind of excited by the offer, but he was also pretty excited the way things had been working out in LA at that. And they hadn't been in LA for that long, and he was pretty close to Walter O'Malley, who was almost like a father to him, and Peter O'Malley, the son. And he said they kind of grew up almost like they were like brothers. And so Vinny just couldn't do it. And but that was a pretty interesting story to hear, though, from Vinny himself. But anyway, years ago, Sammy Sosa was hitting all these home runs in '98, and Mark McGwire was hitting home runs. And I remember in the '80s when the movie, The Natural came out, and Roy Hobbs had hit a home run, and the announcer that they had in the movie would say, "Goodbye, Mr. Spalding," or whatever. So I thought, well, maybe I could come up with, if Sosa hits a home run on our ESPN telecast, I can say, "Adios, Senor Pelota," or whatever. Sort of do a similar thing in Spanish. But then it was pointed out to me, like, well, pelota, the word for ball in Spanish, is feminine. So you can't say Senor Pelota. That makes no sense, And I thought, well, it would kind of lose the impact if I called it Senorita Pelota, but it doesn't sound quite macho enough for a guy hitting a 450-foot home run. So Sammy hit the home run. I just said, "Adios, Pelota," and he liked it. And a few years later, the Giants came up with, and I only used it really if Sammy hit a home run on a national telecast. But years later, we had Pablo Sandoval, and one night he hit a home run, and I said, "Adios, Pelota," and Pablo really got a kick out of it, and he said, "Hey, adios, Pelota, wow, muy mejor," and whatever, and he kind of gave me the thumbs up on it. So then I thought, well, every time Pablo hits a home run, I'm saying "Adios, Pelota," and then all of a sudden, as the years went on, Pablo went to the Red Sox, and the Giants really didn't even have any Hispanic guys who hit home runs to speak of. And so Buster Posey hit one, or Hunter Pence hit one, and it just came out, "Adios, Pelota." I thought, well, I like to use it for somebody, and so I kept it in there. But then Pablo came back to the Giants, for the last 2 or 3 years, and so I tried to maybe use it as if one of the Hispanic players hit the home run, just to differentiate it. But actually, when I'm making a confession here to you, when I left the Bay Area, I went to Texas. I did the Texas Ranger games in the late '70s, and then I went to Boston and did the Red Sox games, 1980, 81, 82, and I would just say when either one of those teams had hit a home run, I'd just say, "Tell it goodbye." I just ripped off Lon Simmons' call, and even when I went to Baltimore, "Tell it goodbye," and I was into it. But then when I came to the Giants, it's like, well, I can't really use "Tell it goodbye" any longer, because it belongs to Lon. It's Lon's call. So so that was the end of that for me. But anyway, so I don't really have any one call, but "Adios, Pelota" is one that people associate, and I do like to try to get the Hispanic names correct, pronounced correctly. So because I think the Hispanic players, and we had Felipe Alou was the manager for a few years, and a wonderful human being, besides being a great baseball man, and so I speak a little bit of Spanish, and but I definitely know how to have the proper pronunciation. So that's the main thing I try to do, is just get those names correct, But I mean, it always hits me as being out of tune when I hear an old tape of announcers calling Roberto Clemente Bobby Clemente,
That was Prince.
And Bobby, what? And so anyway, I remember we had a guy who started with the Yankees that was a coach for the Giants when I got there later on with the Giants, named Roberto Kelly. And I remember he went to play in Cincinnati at one point, and they were calling him Bobby Kelly in Cincinnati. And Joe Morgan and I were doing ESPN Sunday Night Baseball, and I remember I said, "Well, what's this Bobby Kelly?" And he said, "Well, they say it'll be more like Cincinnati if I go with Bobby Kelly." I said, "Yeah, but your name is Roberto Kelly. You've had a good career as Roberto Kelly. Why don't you just tell them you want to be called by your actual name?" He said, "Well, I just want to kind of want to fit in and blah blah blah." But I said, "Well, tonight on the national TV, we're calling you Roberto Kelly, if you don't mind." And he said, "Oh, of course, that's my name. Yeah." So I always remember that. I say, "Yes, that's my name. Just call me by my name." So.
Hey, John.
John.
I don't want you to answer this now. This is probably something for afterwards. Maybe you and Gary can connect. The name Vince Scully has come up so many times now during the session, and Gary's got a tremendous lineup of stars, but it's going to be tough to match this one. You've been just terrific. But it's a small world. I was a school teacher in New York City for 35 years in Upper Manhattan, 176, 177th between Audubon and St. Nicholas, not far from Polo Grounds or Yankee Stadium. I found out during my career that Vince Scully went to school, obviously when he was, before I got there, at a little school called the Incarnation School, which was 1 block from where I taught. It was a parochial school. My question is this. I have a good friend who's the voice of UCLA baseball, Tim Wilhelm. Not sure if you know him. He does some PA stuff at Camelback Ranch during spring training. And we talked about Vince Scully, and he said, well, the best bet is probably to go through the Dodgers. So I'm going to ask Gary at some point, maybe after the meeting or next day or two, maybe you have an in for us that we can get the great Vince Scully to come on here. I'm sure he'd like it. I'm sure you've enjoyed this hour and a half, but we certainly enjoyed listening to you. It's terrific.
Thank you. Thank you.
John, I have one question for you, John. How was that day when you were inducted to the Hall of Fame for the Ford Frick Award? Can you tell us about that day?
Well, I mean, that really was kind of an amazing day, and it was, I was sort of overwhelmed by it because, and I think I mentioned in the talk that I gave that I always viewed the fact of actually being able to broadcast Major League Baseball every day as being its own reward, that I got rewarded every day, all season, every year, because I got to go to a ballpark, a big league ballpark, and broadcast a baseball game, which was my dream ever since I can remember. So I was a little overwhelmed to be getting more awards on top of that. And so I'm very grateful because my whole family just about came up to Cooperstown. I think there must have been about 50 people that we had to find hotel rooms for and get plane tickets for and whatnot. And they were all up there. And we found a place in downtown, I guess you could call it downtown Cooperstown, where we had a big party after the ceremony. And I was very fortunate because they had decided before that they were going to move the ceremonies to for the Ford Frick broadcast winner and the Spink writers winner to the day before the actual induction ceremonies. So I got in as the last year. Bill Madden of the Daily News won the Writers Award. So we were there, the two of us. It was the last year that it all was done the same day that we received our awards and made our speeches the same day as all the Hall of Famers. So, which to me made it the most special to be there with all those guys. And so Whitey Herzog went in that year, and Andre Dawson went in that year. They both gave great speeches. And Whitey Herzog played for Casey Stengel. And he said that he was kind of a favorite of Casey's. So he would always pick Casey's brain, almost like he was studying to be a manager, later on in his career. And he said, Casey, there was an old giant named Buck Herzog from way back that had been I guess a teammate of Casey Stengel's or whatever, Buck Herzog. And it was a third baseman or whatever. And somehow Casey decided, the old professor decided that Whitey must have been Buck Herzog's son or grandson or, or somehow related to him. So he kind of took Whitey under his wing, and Whitey kind of put that all together and never told him otherwise, even though he had never even heard of Buck Herzog until Casey brought his name up to him, and then he looked him up in the encyclopedia. Anyway, so that was kind of an exciting thing, and they treat you just like you're a king. And one of the great thing was that they took me and my family, my immediate family, down into the archives at the Hall of Fame, and the curator had brought out a few special things that he thought we would enjoy seeing. And one of them was a bat, a Ted Williams bat that was broken. And Ted Williams had presented this bat personally to the Hall of Fame. And the significance of it was the first time he ever batted in a big league game against Satchel Paige was at Fenway Park. And he was so excited and so eager because he knew all about Satchel Paige. He knew the great stories of his career. And he was just so excited to face him. And he got jammed and broke his bat and grounded out. And he was, very upset. But the next day, he found Satchel Paige during batting practice with the bat and asked him if he would sign the bat for him. And then they talked and they got to know each other a little bit. And so I just thought, well, that's the most special thing that I've seen at the Hall of Fame, because it takes you not just into a time and a place, but into the head of one of the greatest players of all time, Ted Williams, as he, like a kid, was asking another great player for an autograph. And then he presented it to the Hall of Fame, and the way they told the story was, now, I don't know, it's just a broken bat. Maybe you're not interested, but here's the story about it. And you're welcome to have it. I was thinking maybe you'd want it for the Hall of Fame. And of course, they were like nuts for it. Are you kidding? Fantastic. And thanks so much. So that was kind of a really cool thing. And the other thing that they brought out was, from the day Bobby Thompson hit, the shot heard around the world for the miracle of Coogan's Bluff in 1951, October the 3rd, they had Russ Hodges' score sheet from his scorebook. And he never filled in the home run, and it also, Ernie Harwell had signed the sheet and put his phone number on it. And that's still in the Hall of Fame to this day. So if you have a chance, I think the Hall of Fame put a copy of that on Twitter just on October the 3rd. And but Russ Hodges, and all the excitement, never got around to filling in Bobby Thompson's home run. So, and we used to hear that, like I said earlier, between games of a doubleheader every year, and Russ would tell the story. And then who knew that years later, 2014, the Giants, and times had changed now. To win the pennant, you have to win the league championship series. And the Giants were in a tie game, and a couple of runners on base. It's the bottom of the ninth inning. And we had a guy named Travis Ishikawa. And he hits a 3-run homer to win the pennant. So we had our own Bobby Thompson moment. It was the first time since Bobby Thompson, and the second time in the Giants' history, that they had won the pennant on a walk-off home run. And it was Travis Ishikawa, of all people, who did it. And I got to do the broadcast. And I didn't remember anything about it even by the next day, because I just was kind of delirious, I certainly could empathize with Russ Hodges and how he must have felt back in 1951. But then the New York Times actually wrote a transcript of my call of, the Ishikawa home run. And he graded me even a little step ahead of Russ Hodges, because he thought Russ got a little too carried away or whatever. So obviously, I think his name was Richard Sandomir, was not a Giants fan, but because I thought Russ's call was the greatest of all time. And I remember talking to Ernie Harwell about it, who broadcast that same moment.
Score sheet, John.
Oh, there you go.
He didn't fill in.
Yeah, he did not fill it in.
This is it's a copy of the actual score sheet.
Yeah, that's cool.
There's
Ernie Harwell's signature and his phone number.
Yeah.
Which I just assumed that the season was ending and he got Ernie to give him his phone number. So if he wanted to get in touch with him in the off season or something, but anyway, so, and then when I read I thought it came out better in print than in the audio. I liked it better the way they printed it out in the New York Times and the way when I heard it for myself. But
John,
anyway, that's the
John?
Giants, and that was a fitting into a pennant race for any Giants fan right there.
Hey, John.
Hi, John.
A footnote to the Ishikawa story that may not be that well known. Ishikawa's parents were interned during World War II by
Roosevelt,
and the Japanese many of them were interned.
Terrible episode in our history. Ishikawa, great guy, and he almost retired that year. He was stuck in the minor leagues. He wasn't even the first string first baseman in the minor leagues, and his old high school baseball coach, and he's a very religious guy. I guess his pastor. They both recommended he keep going, and then he got hot, and because he got hot, the Giants brought him up because they had some injury problems. And the great story about it was that the final weekend of the season, the Giants had no left fielder. And, you're going into the postseason, you need a left fielder. So they put him in left field for the last 3 or 4 games of the regular season. He never got a tough chance. He didn't do anything but field base hits and an occasional high fly ball where he hardly had to move. And so they asked Bochy about it. And Bochy said, well, I don't know what we could tell of him as a left fielder from that, but he's a left-handed hitter who's got some power, so close enough. Let's keep him on, So that's why they kept him on the roster. Now, in the game where he hits the walk-off homer, earlier in that game, he had butchered a ball in left field, and it cost the Giants a run or two. So their plan was against right-handers, he would be the left fielder and maybe hit a home run. But at the same time, if they were leading, then get him out of there as soon as possible and put in better defense. But the Giants tied the game on a Michael Morse pinch hit homer in the 8th inning. And then Ron Wotus was the bench coach, and he said to Bruce Bochy, he says, well, should we get him out of there for defense in the 9th? And Bochy was like, well, they're going to bring in a right-hander. I just have this bad feeling that we're going to end up with Juan Perez coming up, and we'll want Ishikawa up, in a big spot. So I think he says, all right, but and that day especially because he had already butchered a ball in left field to begin with. So, but they kept him in there just to play a hunch, and then of course he hits the 3-run homer. So, and as he's rounding second base and the crowd is going nuts, Jake Peavy, starting pitcher on that team, a veteran, who has the worst eyesight. Jake Peavy had terrible eyesight. So he did not realize that it was a home run. All he knew was if the guy from second scored, the Giants won. He lost sight of the ball as it went over the outfielder's head, and he thought it was, a base hit. He comes vaulting over the railing from the dugout out onto the field, and he wants to jump onto Ishikawa's arms between second and third. And Ishikawa says, no, get away. I hit a home run. I'm trying to run out the home run. And Peavy's like, what? What are you talking about? He says, I hit a home run. Let me run. He says, oh, it's a home run? He had no clue what was going on. So when you see the video of Ishikawa trying to round the bases, there's Peavy trying to keep him from doing it, which actually happened. It cost Robin Ventura, what was it, a game-ending grand slam, right, in a postseason game for the Mets a few years back. But because they all came running out and jumped on him, and he couldn't even get to second base, so he got a game-ending single instead. But anyway, and then they won the World Series with Ishikawa being the primary left fielder. It was crazy that even happened, but those were the stories of the Giants in those postseasons, because they were not favored to win in any of those seasons, and they won 3 of them.
Well, John,
1951, in that third playoff game, he botched 2 balls in the field.
Bobby Thompson did?
Yes, he did. Yeah. He led into the Dodgers scoring to build up their form.
One of my favorite books was this, and it's out as a book, but what was the guy's name? Arnold Hano?
Oh, Hano.
And he sat in the center field bleachers that day for the Bobby Thompson game. And he wrote a whole story about it, kind of a long form story. And they made a kind of a book out of it. And it's really incredible. He would sit in the center field bleachers at the Polo Grounds because he felt like he could see the movement on the pitches from out there. Even though he was so far away from home plate, nowhere else in the ballpark could he get see what, the pitches were inside, outside, if they had a curve to them or fastball, that's where he could really get the look and to really see what was happening with the pitches. And that's where he wanted to study the game from. So for him, that was the ideal place to be for that game. And he had it's an incredible thing if you can find it, because
here it is.
Maybe you've all.
There it is.
There it is. Yeah. So, was it about 54 instead?
Yes.
Yeah, that was amazing.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's it. So I
Day in the Bleachers.
Yeah.
Great book.
So a great
Anybody else
read
have a
anyway.
comment who hasn't spoken?
Yeah. So, hi, John. Hi, John. This is Ed Logan.
Hi, Ed.
You and I have never met. I don't know how well you knew my dad, but a couple of things. In the groundbreaking of what is now Oracle Park, I believe you were the MC.
Yeah.
And I have you on tape. I have you on high 8 tape. At some point, I'm going to be able to send that to you.
Oh, great. Okay.
But something you may or may not know. My grandfather was the Yankee clubhouse guy from day 1 to 1946.
Wow.
And thanks to Gary and Steve, I was at the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago, and the archives brought out his Yankee cap that he never took off the whole time he was in the clubhouse. And they showed it to me. He had just like Funk and Wagnalls. You had to wear gloves to look at this thing.
Wow. Yeah. Put these little white gloves on. Yeah.
And not only was the Yankee clubhouse manager, he's also the Giants clubhouse manager, and my dad was too. So
wow. Cool.
All this is documented in several books and videos and everything else. What you may or may not know, I was bat boy for the Giants in '57, the only bat boy for Willie Mays and company that whole year.
Wow.
But years before that, I literally grew up in the Polo Grounds. I knew every nook and cranny in that edifice. I used to ride my bike all around. All this has been documented. So probably on this particular broadcast, I'm the only one I can say, yeah, I know everything there is to know about the Polo Grounds.
Cool. Well, I envy you.
I want to show you a picture. I don't know if it's going to come across, but this is me as a Giant bat boy.
Wow. Cool.
And I have other pictures that show the Polo Grounds in the background, which of course doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's at some point in our history, and there are several books, and Gary and them can tell you where all this is. My dad and my grandfather jointly covered the Yankees and the Giants clubhouses at the same time.
Wow.
So it goes,
at the Polo Grounds, they used to say that the groundskeeper had an apartment. He and his family lived underneath the stands behind the left field wall.
Yes, and I stayed with their son Jerry many times, and played on the field, played in the stands.
Was that Matty Schwab? Was that his name?
Matty Schwab and Jerry Schwab and Rose. Okay. Rose Schwab. Yes.
And they came out to San Francisco.
And I think you should mention that your dad hired Mike Murphy.
Hired Mike Murphy. My grandfather hired Pete Sheehy. This whole thing is in the DNA. But again, all that has been covered in several books, and Gary and Steve can give you an update on that in case you don't know all that. That should be added to whatever the Giants do at their stadium now. Should make available that even their bookstore. We had a particular story by Dr. Larry Hogan, who did the whole history of my grandfather, my father, and Mike Murphy, Miguel Murphy, by the way, in Spanish. And it's called So Many Seasons in the Sun, and it's still available. Extensive coverage of all of the clubhouse guys, who, by the way, have never given anything in the Hall of Fame. There's nothing about the clubhouse guys and nothing about the Bat Boys, even though they had women softball players. I don't know where they got that from, but
Excuse me.
Hey. No, we love that. We love that. Okay, but still, to this day, we don't have anything up there. So anyway, and we did a book signing, Dr. Hogan and I, at the Hall of Fame when his book came out. And we did a presentation, and it so happened that was, when you win the World Series, the next year, the Hall of Fame has the World Series Day, and it happened to be San Francisco. So there were a lot of people from San Francisco attended that, and we signed copies, and it went over really well. So
cool.
I'm not sure you knew any of that, John, but that.
Well, Murph, there's a book out about Murph that just came out this past year.
Just came out, yes.
Yeah.
It just came out. In fact,
is that the book you were talking about?
No. That's from the Stick to the Cove.
Stick to the Cove.
A different one.
Yes, a different one.
This is the
in
book.
fact, the author of that, we just had the author of that on. This is the one I'm talking about.
All right.
So Many Seasons in the Sun.
So Many Seasons in the Sun.
Good book. Yeah.
Cool.
So,
well, there's a friend of mine who is, I think, listening in with everyone today, Anika Orok, great baseball fan and an artist, who came out with a great baseball book called The Incredible Women of the All-American Girls Baseball Professional League. And the Chronicle Publishing, it came out just before spring training got stopped back in March.
Right.
And just before she should have been going on her book tour.
Sure.
She and John Shea with his book and some of these other baseball writers, they came out with the Pandemic Baseball Writers Association, and they've been able to promote their books through social media in different ways and as a group. And so she's on, but I really enjoyed her book because I saw that movie, but hers is a real, the movie was a fictionalized account of what was going on. She traveled all over the country and met with these women and people who were involved in that league and who are still alive, and tells these incredible stories, including there were a couple of women who were not allowed to play in the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League because they were Black. And two of them ended up playing in the old Negro leagues. So two of the only women ever to play professional baseball, but in the Negro leagues instead. Toni Stone was one of them. And and she's involved right now. There's
Mamie Johnson.
Yeah, that's it. And
do you know Perry? Do you know Perry Barber? She's the umpire.
No.
Female umpire.
No.
She's a member of our society. Terrific lady.
Oh.
Yeah, Perry Barber just got in touch with me about Anika, John. And
good.
hoping to have Anika in December. Talk about her book.
That's terrific. Anika I met at the Sabre Convention in 2017 in New York.
Yeah.
And she.
There she is.
Hi, Anika. I bought quite a few things from you, and I think you met. Give me a minute. Jean that day. You met Jean that day, and I think you've been in touch with her for quite a while now, right? I can't find you on here, but anyway, it's Ernestine Miller, and we met, and I bought quite a few wonderful. I have it hanging right here. I can get it and show everybody, but I really love your work, and it's so great that you're doing all of this. So congratulations. I want your book. But have you been? Yeah, Jean was on a call with me for my birthday, which was in May. She's terrific. Jean Ackerman, I'm Jean Ackerman, everybody knows, the senior VP and assistant general manager of the New York Yankees, one of the great ladies in baseball, great people altogether.
Anika, we want to get you here in December so you can sell some.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Gosh, that was an overwhelming and lovely treat to hear right now. So, but I have to say this is really special because first of all, John Miller has a lot to do with how and why I got into creating baseball art as a career, pretty much. And Ernestine, I was so excited to see you on here because I never knew how to contact you. You are the reason that I know Jean Afterman because you purchased a piece of my art and gifted it to her during Sabre, and she in turn wrote the foreword to my book. So we've become friends since then. She grew up a Giants fan, I'm sure you know. So so this is kind of a cool whole thing for me.
World, right? This is great. Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
And Anika was invited and was all booked and ready to go to throw out the first ball at a Yankees game this past year.
Okay.
You know, where they could mention her book and her
I'll try
as
it.
an author and whatnot.
I'm gonna leave it out. I guess overnight, so cool.
I love
But
it.
then, of course, that got wiped out because of the pandemic, you know. So anyway, next year. First ball ceremony. Yeah, come on.
Hopefully next year.
John, this is Rich Sternberg. I'm one of the trustees of Cooperstown. How are you?
Great.
When can we see you again?
Well, I really enjoyed it up there, but and I went back one other time when Eric Nadel got the voice of the Texas Rangers, got the Ford Frick Award, and I wanted to get up there because Eric did his first ever game with me when I did the Texas games. So I wanted to get up there so I could, you know, immediately take credit for all of his success. But although actually really just to share the event with him. And Eric is the Texas Rangers broadcaster, but he's from Brooklyn. So he
Don, do you remember what Eric's famous, well, I thought it was famous because he said it every single time. When a pitcher threw, he never threw, he deals. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah? No, I don't know.
No, so-and-so.
Oh, yeah? No. And do you like that?
Deals.
And do you like that?
We were playing cards.
Yeah.
When Eric called it.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey,
Well, if you
Richard,
like that.
how about when you induct Horace Stoneham? We'll all come.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you guys want,
So
here's
John,
the deal. Here's the deal, guys. You guys come. You come a day or two early. We'll do a barbecue on my lawn. I'm across the street from the Otis Saga.
Wow.
Perfect.
Cool.
Hey, John.
Rich is one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. I spoke up there at Cooperstown, and my sister-in-law, unfortunately, had an accident. He was right there to help her out.
Wow.
Just a lovely guy. And Rich, thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Hey, John.
Yes.
So I'm Jamie Rupert. I'm Horace Stoneham's granddaughter. And
Oh,
New
hi.
York, hi. So this lovely group of people have welcomed me after having a grandfather who broke their hearts. But they all, Devin, sorry, of course, she's barking when. So I'd love to be able to talk with you, and we are all working to get Horace in the hall. He's not in the hall, and listening to all your stories and everybody's stories. Again, I would love to be able to find a way we could all come together and work to get him in the hall for 2022 now, is it, guys?
Yes.
Cool.
So,
Well, let me know if I can help with any of that. So.
thanks so much. We'd love to see you there.
All right.
John?
Yes.
Over the weekend, of course, we lost Bob Gibson. I don't know if everybody was able to see the Bob Costas interview with the MLB commentator about a story that happened at Candlestick Park, where after the game, Mays invited Bill White over, and he said, "Could I bring Bob Gibson over?" So Bob Gibson comes over with Bill White to Mays' house wearing glasses. And Willie Mays said, "You wear glasses? You're gonna kill somebody."
Well, you know, I got to know Bob Gibson a little bit years later when, you know, I was doing Sunday Night Baseball on ESPN, and we'd see him sometimes in St. Louis. And one year, Joe Morgan and I were there for, I can't remember if it was a World Series or a League Championship Series, but we were broadcasting the games on ESPN radio. And they always have, these hospitality suites for after games for the media in from out of town. So I went to that and saw Bob Gibson there, and we were talking. And then, well, we ended up spending a great deal of time with each other, which I look back now and kind of cherish the memory of it. But Bob eventually took me out to his car and drove me back to my hotel. It was, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning or 1:30 in the morning. But he told me the story, and probably everybody knows the story. He said, "Oh, everybody said that I was always glaring." He says, "I wasn't glaring. I had very bad eyesight. And I thought it would be, would not be good for the image if I'm out there wearing glasses. So I was just struggling like hell just to see the catcher's signs. I had to squint and, look in like crazy just to see what he was calling for the next pitch. And he told some great stories where he said that, Frank Robinson, he did hit Frank Robinson, but he says, those pitches I hit him with were strikes. Because he got right out on top of the plate where his arms were over the plate. They were in the strike zone. So I'm just trying to hit the inside corner. And occasionally I hit him because he wouldn't move. He stood his ground, So anyway, I found him to be a warm, engaging human being. And I always remember a few times being in New York, emceeing the annual BAT dinner, the baseball assistance team dinner. And a lot of Hall of Famers go to that every year to support the cause. And a lot of major league players go. I think every table in the ballroom has at least one major league player sitting at each table. So Sandy Koufax was there, and we were talking about all-star games and this and that. But Sandy also told the story about how he and Bob Gibson and their wives, or their significant others, had become the best of friends. And he and his partner and Bob Gibson and his wife, they would go on vacations every year. They go to the Caribbean or wherever they were going that year, and which was just such a cool story. And he Koufax just couldn't get over what a great guy Gibson was, because Gibson had this reputation of being so mean and so competitive and whatnot. And he was just thrilled to find out through their association at the Hall of Fame and whatnot, that he was not only not a mean guy, but a great guy. And they just became the best of friends. So I know when I read that he passed away, the sad news about his passing, the first guy I thought of was Sandy Koufax, and how profoundly sad that must have been for him.
All right, we're on 2 hours now. Any final comments that need to be made? Because, John just had surgery yesterday. He looks like he's, needs a little time to recuperate. He's been so pleasant here with us for 2 hours. Anybody else need to say something? Lee.
Yeah, just hi, John. We met in Baltimore, and
you wrote the Tom Seaver book.
Yeah, and the Branch Rickey biography, since I've seen you last.
All right.
It's
cool.
so bittersweet to see you
fabulous.
today, because, our friend Phil Levy has been gone now for 3 years, who ran the bookstore in D.C. That's the last time I think I saw you.
Okay.
But the question I wanted to ask is, it must have been a thrill for you to see the flowering of Mike Yastrzemski for all, the history in that family.
Well, when I broadcast Red Sox games, 1980, 81, 82, it was very late in Carl Yastrzemski's career. He retired the year after I went to Baltimore. 83 was his final season. And, Yaz was older than all the other guys on the team. And he had known Ken Coleman for much of his career. Ken had been the Red Sox broadcaster, so Ken was my partner. So a lot of times, if there was a day off on the road, Carl was too old to be hanging out with his teammates on the Red Sox. He'd go to dinner with me and Ken, and or maybe our engineer. There was a guy named Josh Spofford who I think later who was kind of our assistant who traveled with us and whatnot. But so I knew Carl pretty well at that time. And so then all of a sudden, here's his grandson being brought to the big leagues. I just couldn't believe it. And I was so excited. And turns out he can play. He was a diamond in the rough. And here with Ball, they're the worst. They're one of the worst teams in the game. And he never even got into the big leagues even for a minute with the Orioles. And he did not get to the big leagues last year until late May. So he missed the first third of the season and still tied for the club lead in home runs. He hit 21 homers. The other part of that story is he was slumping around the All-Star break. And right after the All-Star break, before the Saturday afternoon game in Milwaukee, Bruce Bochy brought him into the office and told him that they were sending him back to the minor leagues. And says, we've been impressed with you, you'll be back, and so on and so forth. So then Yaz leaves the office to go to his locker and clear out his locker. And the trainer comes in and he says, oh, Evan Longoria can't play. He's got the foot. He's going to have to go on the disabled list. He's got the plantar fasciitis on his foot. And so Bochy says, oh, my God. Well, you got to go out to get Yastrzemski. Make sure he hasn't left yet. So we've got to keep Yastrzemski and put him in the lineup. So unfortunately, Yaz had not left. And then the rest of it just was history, because he did great. The longer he stayed, the more he played. The more he played, the better he got. And he was in the MVP conversation early on this year. And he slowed down a little bit. Then he got hurt and missed a lot of time. But anyway, it was just so exciting to see. And the greatest moments of last season, 2019, a week after he got to the big leagues, the Orioles hosted the Giants interleague play. The franchise that had signed him and never brought him to the big leagues. And his first at bat at Camden Yards, where he had dreamed of playing all those years in the Oriole farm system, he hits a triple in the first inning. In the second inning, he hits a home run, his first major league homer. And I remember thinking, wow, some guys would get a little overexcited and maybe a little too wound up, and they'd be trying too hard, and that would throw them off a big game like that. He was just the opposite. He was able to compartmentalize, and he rose to the occasion. Now, later in the season, the Giants played interleague play at Fenway Park, where he grew up. He's a New Englander, and his grandfather was a legend. And so his grandfather, he gets word in the clubhouse before game one of the series that his grandfather's out on the field at batting practice. So Mike goes out to see his grandfather. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. And, people are taking photos, and they go out to the left field wall, and they're talking about the wall that his grandfather had played in Hall of Fame fashion for all those many years. And I remember asking, I said, well, did your grandfather give you some advice about certain aspects of playing the wall? He says, well, I grew up here. I knew all about the wall already, so whatever advice there was to be had, he'd already gotten it years before. But, so the first night at Fenway, he gets introduced in the starting lineup and gets a huge ovation from Red Sox fans, giving a huge ovation to a Giants rookie. And then his first at bat, he gets another huge ovation. He hit leadoff, and it was facing this hard-throwing right-hander and a former Dodger, by the way. And he ends up striking out against him on a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. His second at bat, he gets a fastball again, and he plants it in the center field bleachers. And Fenway Park went nuts. It was so exciting and so unexpected. And the people were just genuinely thrilled to see somebody named Yastrzemski hitting a home run at Fenway Park once again after all those years. And I really had to hand it to him. I mean, because that could have taken you out of your game. And yet he stayed focused and did not let it get to him. And he just, those were two of the biggest moments for me of showing that he could not, that he could handle his own adrenaline, where you'd really have that adrenaline. And I'd love to have seen him in the postseason, knowing that about him, and they almost made it into that division or that, what is it, the wild card series, but they just couldn't win that one last game, even though he was back off the injured list and doing great in those games. The team just couldn't make it. So anyway, that for me was just, and I feel like I am the only broadcaster in history who did the daily games for a Hall of Fame outfielder, who then did the daily games for his grandson. Now, there have been a lot of fathers and sons, but and I don't know, it just is a quirk, of time and place. But I brought out the old song, the Jess Kane song from Boston, the Carl Yastrzemski song to the Hallelujah chorus. Carl Yastrzemski, Carl Yastrzemski, Carl Yastrzemski, the man we call, yes, we love him, Carl, and the whole bit. So and it wasn't auspicious when he broke in, because his first game, he got his first major league hit, and he was so excited. He took a big turn around first base, and the left fielder came up throwing back to first and picked him off. So he just got his first hit and then got picked. Didn't even have a chance to even take a lead off of first base, even for one pitch. So so now his next at bat, he gets another base hit. His wife and his mother were sitting in the stands, and they had a shot of him. And as he's going to first base, they show his wife saying, "Stay there, stay there." So anyway, he seems like a great, and he's not that young. He just turned 30. So I don't know how many more years he's got, but he can really play, and he's not a big guy either. So and his grandfather was not a big guy, for that matter.
Gary, you
want to wrap it up?
I have a.
Yeah, I'd like to if I can. John, I just wanted to mention the first time that I heard you on the radio. This was back in July 1988. I was down in Baltimore for a golf tournament, and a friend of mine knew I was going there. He said, "They've got a great announcer down in Baltimore. You got to listen to him." So I said, "Okay." So I came back after dinner, turned the radio on in the motel, and I believe they were playing the California Angels. And it was a rain delay. And I said, well, not much to listen to here. And I was just ready to turn the radio off, and all of a sudden, you say, well, we have a special guest here. Now here's Vin Scully. And you went up to Scully for about 10 minutes or so. And I was laughing so hard I nearly fell off the chair. And I think you brought Harry into it. And it was just wonderful. It was just such a treat. And a couple of days later, my friend said, well, I called him. He said, what do you think? I said, it was really a treat. He said, it was far better than what you told me it was going to be. And years later, when you went to the Giants, for some reason, I was talking to Sue Peterson, who headed the community fund. And I said, well, you're going to be in for a real treat. This guy's one of the great ones. And I just wanted to say thank you for all the years of
thank you.
Of a lot of great games. And I was fortunate enough to meet you at Oracle Park several years ago, and you signed a book that I had, a Giants Encyclopedia. There's 75 guys in there. You signed it, Lon Simmons signed it, Mays, Cepeda, Hall of Famers, Mike Murphy signed it, everybody. Eddie, you got to sign it. I'll mail it out to you in Arizona one of these days. But I just wanted to thank you. I mean, it's just it's always a pleasure to hear you, whether it was with the Orioles or whether it was with the Giants. And thank you.
Well, thank you.
John, you are now an honorary member, always welcome at any of our meetings. And we cannot thank you enough for just a wonderful night of entertainment, informative, educational, and fun. So we all salute you. Thank you so much.